Welcome in, everyone, to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Thursday, September 5th around here, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to continue with our Week 2 breakdowns. We'll get into Colorado at Nebraska first, an incredible game over there in Lincoln, and then we'll get to Tennessee at North Carolina State, although they are playing in Charlotte, so not necessarily at North Carolina State. But we'll break down both of those two huge games in the late-night slate on Saturday. Then we'll continue with the Week 2 predictions. We'll do three more games for you today. South Carolina, Kentucky, California at Auburn, or Cal at Auburn. Feels weird to call them California. And then Kansas at Illinois is the other one that I want to talk about. A number of really big time games in that kind of middle of the day towards the night that I want to break down for you guys. Then we'll get into the top 10 teams. Where are they this week, and what do we need to see from them this week after a couple of not great performances in Week 1? And then we get to Thursday hot takes. I'll do a couple of hot takes about this upcoming weekend. Who's going to start a Heisman campaign? Who's going to struggle this weekend when they really shouldn't? A lot of different things that I want to break down for you guys. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have a fun back and forth here, is to use that super chat feature at the bottom of your chat. You can see that little $sign. If you click on that, add any question or comment you'd like, add your name, it will pop up on the screen and we'll be able to have a fun back and forth here. Sometimes the chat goes a little bit fast for me to keep up with, so that's definitely a great way to go about it. But either way you want to do that, you can also use the GSMCpodcast.net page, still up and working and does the exact same thing. So either of those will work fine, and we'll make this a little bit more interactive, which is always what I want. But let's jump into Colorado heading over to Lincoln, Nebraska to play a huge rivalry game this next weekend. And I think this might be one of those games that Texas-Michigan is the big game of the weekend. I think everyone understands that. This one is not taking that much of a backseat. This is a crazy game and so much going into it on both sides of the ball. So it's going to be absolutely awesome in Lincoln, Nebraska this upcoming weekend. And we get this game at night. It's going to be awesome to watch this one under the lights with that crowd, with that energy at 7:30 p.m. on Saturday. And it's an awesome game. Nebraska's only favored by a little bit over a touchdown, roughly where I expected them to be. And I think the quarterback matchup is the one that turns all the heads, right? Shedeur Sanders, one of the best quarterbacks and players in the country, and then Dylan Raiola, one of the young guns, a guy that could very well be in that group come next year or even later on this year. A very talented player, and one that pretty much everyone is watching, all the way from us college football fans all the way up to NFL scouts right about now. So this game is really hard not to love. These two teams go back such a far way. I'd like to see them play every single year, but we haven't been quite as lucky in that over recent times. But on one side of the ball, you have Colorado with all of this hype, with all of this energy, and whenever Colorado walks into a building, there's going to be energy, no doubt about that. And then on the other side, Nebraska finally has their hope, right? They finally feel like they might be heading back up to the promised land, and it's because of number 15. It's because of Dylan Raiola, so this is a lot of energy going into one. Obviously, Nebraska coming off a dominant performance against UTEP. Colorado got a big-time win over North Dakota State and got a little bit of extra rest, which obviously helps a little bit. So I think the biggest thing here is we're going to see a very different style of game from both these teams, particularly on offense, and it's going to be really interesting to see which one comes out on top. But let's get into the players to watch, and the first one I want to start with is Jalen Lloyd. I think when we talk about Colorado, it's all explosive plays, it's all down the field, it's all Travis Hunter and Jimmy Horn Jr. and LeJontay Wester running free in the back end. Jalen Lloyd can do that as well, and I think that's something that Nebraska is likely going to need in this game. Is just at some point in this game, you likely want to run the clock and likely want to use the run game a ton in this game, but at one point, you'd love to break one, and at one point, you'd love to attack this back end that has been known to be a little bit vulnerable to that deep ball. So this is a guy that I think could change the game just on a dime. And then MJ Sherman is a guy that has transferred over from Georgia a couple of years ago now and has only become a better player, is more confident in this offense this year, or in his defense this year, than he ever has been before, and is a very talented player coming off the edge. So maybe he's the guy that keeps Shedeur Sanders at bay just a little bit and is able to get him on the ground a couple of times, because last year they were able to get him on the ground 8 times in this game. LeJounte Wester is the other guy I want to talk about. He wasn't quite as heard from in the first game, but this is a very special player. And I think when you're playing a back end like Nebraska's that's so talented, that has so much ability, getting the ball in the hands of guys that are just really special with the ball in their hands and have so much speed is going to be able to help you kind of negate that a little bit. And then Preston Hodge, a very talented nickelback that they brought over in the transfer portal, and he's a very talented kid. He's someone that's going to get a lot of different matchups on Saturday and with a lot of different big body receivers, and he's going to have to handle that. He's a big-time player, but if he makes that one play against Dylan Raiola, maybe forces that one big mistake, this one gets really interesting in a hurry. But let's get to what Colorado needs to do to win this game, and I think the quick pass game is the one that I really think is going to be huge for them. When you talk about this back end for Nebraska, Tommy Hill is a first-round talent type of player. Malcolm Herzog is a very talented guy. Isaac Gifford and Moore are really talented players, really high-level guys, and Colorado has the guys to absolutely match that. There's no doubt about that. Whether it's Shedeur Sanders or all of the ridiculous wide receivers they have, it's going to be one of the great matchups in this game, and I definitely will talk about that a little bit later. But at the end of the day, Travis Hunter, LeJounte Wester, they are very special with the ball in their hands. They are very special because they're so shifty, they're so fast, and I think when you have guys like Tommy Hill and Isaac Gifford on that other side, you want to make sure those guys have the ball in their hands as quickly as possible. They're very good coverage guys on that back end. So anytime you can get the ball in the hands of Travis Hunter, you're doing something right, obviously. But I think especially getting it to him early, slants, curls, screens, just to start the game before you can open up that big play downfield. And then get mistakes from the kid. Get mistakes from Dylan Raiola. This is an absolute must for this team. This defense is not necessarily at the place that you would love it to be. I think it's taken big-time strides from a year ago, no doubt about it, but there were a couple of big-time blown coverages on Saturday, and they very much need to fix that. So if, Dylan Raiola doesn't have to do anything incredible in this game, and Nebraska is able to do 8-minute touchdown drives compared to 2 or 3 for Colorado, I think they'd feel really good about that, if I'm being totally honest. I think Nebraska would love that, and they would say, our defense is going to get a stop at some point, and then we'll be able to run this game out. So I don't know who it's going to be on that back end. Maybe it's Preston Hodge making that big play. Maybe it's Travis Hunter. Maybe it's Shiloh Sanders. But someone needs to take advantage of this young kid and possibly get a pick, because that's likely what Colorado is going to need to win this game. And then no unforced errors. This is a big-time thing in week one where you saw a couple of things from Colorado that were just pointless. They didn't do anything for the game and only put them in a position to really make that game a little bit closer than it probably should have been. And the biggest one that has been talked about is the late game clock management. It was downright egregious. There's no other way to put it. Throwing the ball on 1st and 10 with a minute 30 left doesn't make any sense. There's no other way to talk about it. But no one really knows how that play was called. I don't really want to get into the details of that. Some are saying it was Shedeur. Regardless of who it is, that just cannot happen. And then I think there were not really too many penalties from Colorado. They were pretty clean on that part, but there were a couple from Shiloh Sanders that were just unnecessary. A couple of late hits, a couple of things that were just kind of boneheaded mistakes that don't need to happen. So I think that's the biggest thing, is just don't hand Nebraska anything. They're a very good team that will take whatever you give them. Do not hand them anything without them forcing it at the very least. And then on the Nebraska side, lean on the run game. We know what the big-time advantage is in this game, and it's usually Nebraska in the trenches against Colorado. Now, Colorado is much better on that defensive line this year compared to last, but Nebraska is better on the offensive line as well. So we'll see what happens in that battle. It was a very fun one a year ago, but keep that offense on the sideline. If Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter are standing on the sideline, well, Travis Hunter will never be standing on the sideline, but as long as they are not on offense, you're likely winning this game. That is the biggest thing here, is they are so dangerous on the offensive side of the ball that if you can run the clock and have 6, 7, 8-minute touchdown drives, it's going to be nearly impossible for Colorado to pull this off. It's just going to be impossible for that defense to keep up the way that they need to, and for that offense to make every single play the way that they need to. And then the other part of this is keep Shedeur Sanders in the pocket. He is such a dangerous player when he gets outside of that pocket, and he can dice you up every which way from Tuesday regardless. I can promise you that. So whether he's in the pocket or outside of it, he can do dangerous stuff. There's no doubt about that. But it does make the window smaller. It does make these really incredible wide receivers for Colorado, it makes it harder for them to get that big play potential downfield. So keeping him in the pocket, making sure there's not that play where he's standing pretty much alone for a couple of seconds and then throwing a dart to Travis Hunter 30 yards down the field. So it's a lot of just keeping this guy at bay. You're never going to outright beat Shedeur Sanders. He is too good. He's too talented. He throws the ball with too much anticipation and really just ridiculous talent on the ball. But at the end of the day, you can negate some of his ability. You can keep him in the pocket, you can force him to throw into tight windows, and then maybe you get a mistake or two. And that's really all you need if you're Nebraska. And then finally, use the crowd. This is as excited a Nebraska crowd as you will find in a very, very long time, and they do not struggle to be excited. I can promise you that. So you have a rivalry game. You have a quarterback that they feel incredibly, incredibly good about. You have everything going in one direction. You got to start this game fast. You got to come out of the gate swinging and say, Dylan Raiola, you are a young quarterback. I fully understand that. And you do want to ease him into this game. You don't want him throwing downfield right away, but you also don't want to put the training wheels on. You also don't want to take your foot off the gas because this is such a talented player and such a rhythm thrower that you don't want to take him out of that rhythm. So what I would do if I was Nebraska is take that ball, run the ball down the field, and just bury them. Try to go for a 6, 7, 8-minute drive, score a touchdown, and then Colorado's standing on the sideline thinking, we haven't run an offensive play, and we're about halfway through the first quarter, and then you're in control, and then you're in a place where you can really get going, and that crowd is fully behind you, and you could do it on defense as well. If you wanted to get to Shedeur a couple of times, maybe blitz a little bit more aggressively early on, that would be another way to go about it, but overall, start fast. Come out of the gate swinging and show your crowd that you are coming into this game with the same intensity that they feel going into this game. And then finally, some matchups to watch on this in this game. Tommy Hill against whoever he is matched up with, but particularly Travis Hunter and Jimmy Horn Jr. Those guys are so talented, and keeping those guys at bay is not an easy thing to do, but Tommy Hill is a first-round talent at cornerback, so maybe he can make that one big play that you very much need. And then the Nebraska O-line against the Colorado D-line is absolutely huge. I think when you look at what Nebraska is going to want to do, it's run the ball. There's no two ways about that, and Colorado has gotten a lot better on that defensive line, but whoever wins this battle is likely going to win the game, and you would like to think that Nebraska's O-line would have the big-time advantage, but Colorado can make some things happen, then maybe this gets a little bit closer than we're thinking. And then finally, Shedeur Sanders versus Tony White, the defensive coordinator for Nebraska, because this guy is really hard to trick. He's really hard to get into mistakes and get into precarious situations, but if you can bait him just once or twice, if you can get him to throw into tight windows just once or twice and get a pick or get a fumble, whatever it looks like, you might just win this game. So I think that's the biggest thing is Shedeur Sanders is so hard to beat if you're just 11 players on the field. It takes a really, really good play caller on the other side, and Tony White has every ability to do that, but needs to take a big-time step forward, and that defense needs to play just lights out on Saturday. But overall, I think you look at this game, and there's so many different ways you could go. I think it's going to be a really, really interesting, hard-fought game, but I do think Nebraska gets it done. I think it's a little bit closer than some people might be expecting, but I think Colorado makes a couple of plays down the stretch of this game to make it a little bit closer. I think Nebraska's run game is just too much for this Colorado team to handle, at least for 4 quarters. I think they might be able to hang around through half and maybe through the third quarter, but I think slowly that Colorado D-line and defense in general will be worn down, and Nebraska will be able to get a big-time win in week 2 and then just launch their season off. So it'll be a really fun game over there in Lincoln. I do have Nebraska taking the win, but let's take our first break here, and when we come back, we got to talk about Tennessee at NC State, another incredible game in that night slate. So stick with us, and we'll be right back with the breakdown of that.